Meditate on this. Doing drugs is bad, but not doing the right drugs is frankly dumb and irresponsible. And L-Theanine isn't just the right drug, but in combination with other elements, let's say, it could just be the only drug you need in order to fortify your mental acuity. Only when you take L-Theanine the right way, because this isn't like any other supplement you can just, pop in your mouth and water and down the hatch and off you go. You'll begin to experience a palpable shift in your workflow approach, your level of resistance to that, and also your anxiety and the level of depth and cognition and creative faculties in that particular experience. And at least this is something that I experienced over diligently experimenting with L-Theanine over the last 30 days. Now, first of all, I don't want to sound like a snowflake, but there's some real data on L-Theanine for utility in mental health and markers of sleep and recovery. How much you take, where you source it, how you take it, and also how long it can last for are details needed to be considered in regard to what you will experience when you administer the supplement. And as I mentioned before, there are some unprecedented things you will begin to experience in your consciousness when you begin to combine L-Theanine with certain ingredients. Oh, and if you've already been practicing two particular things regularly, it might genuinely send you into a trance-like state and you may leave this reality altogether. Anyway, moving on. So, do you remember when you were really young and you met your first cousin, your older cousin, really cool, chilled out, mellow, long hair, maybe he had a beanie, he always came back from his fresh air break smelling a little bit suspect. L-Theanine is kind of like him. It's a plant-derived amino acid, although not something that your body kind of produces naturally on its own. It packs a pretty good jab when taken as a supplement. Unlike the heavy hitters like benzos and ethanol, that kind of, they put you to sleep, they sedate you. And they do this by kind of playing handsy with the GABA receptors. Theanine offers a smooth ride into alert relaxation without knocking you out. It's like having a Zen master whisper in your ear instead of a sledgehammer to your cranium. L-Theanine is actually found more naturally in tea leaves, more specifically green tea, as well as some mushroom species, which explains why your gran is pretty chill. So, huge benefit number one. In all seriousness, one of the easiest use cases for L-Theanine for most people will be its utility in the modulation of neurotransmitters and the enhancement of something called alpha wave activity. So we'll talk about neurotransmitter modulation first and foremost. So essentially, in reference to L-Theanine's role in increasing the level of gamma aminobutyric acid, or GABA, dopamine and serotonin, which are associated with a relaxation and mood enhancement. It also inhibits the reuptake of glutamates and blocks hippocampal glutamate receptors, which can help reduce excitatory brain activity, which is typically linked with stress and anxiety. Now, in regards to alpha wave enhancement, this is associated with a state of relaxed alertness, almost meditative in some ways. A study actually involving alpha wave L-Theanine showed that a single dose significantly increased frontal brain region alpha power, indicating and inducing a calming effect on the brain. And they actually measured this by taking your salivary cortisol levels, because that's a typical marker of physiological stress. In regards to more objective empirical evidence, a random 4-week randomized placebo-controlled double-blind trial found that L-Theanine supplemented around 200 milligrams a day, that isn't what I would have you do, significantly reduced scores on anxiety, on depression, and also increased sleep quality index markers in healthy adults, which indicates a reduction in stress-related symptoms and improvements in your sleep quality and cognitive function. But again, 200 milligrams is meh. And hey, I would make the argument that if stress, anxiety, and sleep is better with L-Theanine, then theoretically cortisol will be lower. And if cortisol is lower, you got it, testosterone will be higher. Now, I'm sure that you're not too dissimilar to me, and you, like me, may hate it when people use the general term cognitive performance to describe what somebody may experience, physically experience when they take L-Theanine, which can technically be classified as nootropic, I guess. So let's get into the actual details of how L-Theanine changes how you interface with your work-like tasks. So here's number one. A single dose of L-Theanine can reduce what I call commitment time in attention tasks and increased correct answers while decreasing omission while working in memory tasks. So what does that mean? This suggests that L-Theanine may enhance attention, working memory, and executive function. Benefit number two, a 4-week administration of L-Theanine around 200 milligrams a day improved a skill known as verbal fluency and executive function scores in healthy adults, which essentially means that you are better interfacing with your thought process and bringing them into being without use of filler words, ums and ahs and I don't knows and maybes. Essentially, you become a more proficient speaker. Number three, L-Theanine may act as a partial agonist for a specific receptor, which could contribute to its cognitive enhancing effects. It also modulates monoamine, glutamic acid, and glycine systems. Now, in terms of specificity, I understand this in particular as increased focus, attention, and problem-solving skills. Now, benefit number four is, to be transparent with you, anecdotal in my, well, it's my particular experience, but from what we know about the mechanisms that come into play with L-Theanine, it's not too difficult to draw the links together. Because of this alpha wave, relaxed alertness, consciousness state it promotes, I've discovered, especially in environments where you're not consuming information, so listening to music, watching videos, I'm far more creative, coming up with new ideas, piecing together different pieces of information to iterate on, concepts or projects. Now, before rushing off to purchase, there's some clarifications I should make in terms of application sources and active timeframes, that I should highlight. Now, in terms of sources, the first is your bog standard L-Theanine, which can do the trick in 9 times out of 10 cases. However, I have discovered that the standard L-Theanine may actually contain a mix of L-Theanine and D-theanine isomers. So in response to that, a far more effective and researched variant is sun-theanine, for a few reasons in which I'll describe now. So firstly, it's guaranteed to be 100% pure L-Theanine. It's also more concentrated. It's actually estimated that 1 dose of L-Theanine contains the same amount of L-Theanine as about 10 cups of green tea. It's also thought to have higher bioavailability compared to standard L-Theanine, meaning that it can be more readily absorbed and utilized by the body and has been used in more kind of clinical trials. Now, speaking of bioavailability, here's basically my story. Is I started taking L-Theanine like any normal supplement, pill, water, down the hatch, and off you go. However, I never really experienced the effects until about 45 minutes to an hour after I'd taken L-Theanine, depending on whether or not I'd eaten or not. I usually find if I was in a fasted state that the effects would come on more closer towards the 45 minutes. However, I discovered that a far more effective way was to kind of take the capsule, right? It's in that kind of clear, transparent capsule, break the capsule underneath your tongue and let it absorb under the tongue, and it usually gets into your bloodstream in around about 10 minutes, or at least I experienced the effects in about 10 minutes. The taste isn't too bad. It's actually quite sweet in many cases, so you don't need to worry about any kind of adverse tasting effects. It also should be noted that theanine is more hydrophobic than something like GABA, allowing it to kind of cross into the blood-brain barrier effectively, which GABA actually can't do. Now, dosages, I know I've mentioned 200 milligrams in most of the studies, but I found 400 milligrams to be the sweet spot. Generally, in terms of dosages, studies indicate that you're safe up to 900 milligrams without any adverse side effects, and that's per day. It usually starts to work in around 40 minutes if, again, you're ingesting, but if you're going under the tongue, I usually find about 10 minutes. It has been measured to be effective or still be working on your brain up to 5 hours upon absorption, with peak performance around kind of 15 minutes in but it usually starts to fall after an hour. So peak performance at an hour, unless you combine it with something else. One of the most popular nootropics that people don't really recognize is the socially conventional caffeine. Now, I'm not a huge caffeine drinker because, to be transparent with you, I think I'm a little bit more sensitive than the average person. And when I mean sensitive, I mean I get a lot of jitters and anxiety when I have caffeine. The irony actually is that I find this is worse when I drink caffeine irregularly, and actually is better, or I get less symptoms if I drink it every single day. And my theory is that there's a tolerance factor that comes into play there. However, something changed over the last 30 days when I accidentally poured myself a cup of coffee just before taking my L-Theanine under the tongue. And I experienced another level of alertness that was actually comparable to the first time I ever took nicotine. So the intensity was at least 3x than if I just took theanine by itself. What was most interesting is that I didn't get any of the usual symptoms that I get with caffeine, so no jitters and no anxiety. I did actually try experimenting with nicotine gum, but 400 milligrams, it seems to me, in my estimation, doesn't do anything for the adverse side effects of nicotine in terms of kind of jitters, anxiety equally as well. I'm actually planning to do some experimentation a little bit later on with the dosages, see if I can bump that up to maybe 800 to see if that will counter affect the levels of nicotine. But, you know, with everything, gentlemen, L-Theanine works fine by itself. This was more a personal experiment to see if I could get into deeper states of focus and if I could increase the longevity of those states. And to be honest, how I kind of function with deep work is I actually don't do anything before I get into deep work. I normally do it when I'm starting to, let's say, fatigue. So I do an hour of deep work, maybe it's writing, maybe it's scripting, maybe it's editing, whatever the case may be is, and then I'll start to leverage something like L-Theanine, caffeine, nicotine, whatever the case may be is. And I believe that's the most effective way. Now, due to the calm, alert-like consequences of L-Theanine, I've discovered that individuals already adept at achieving these kinds of states without any supplementation can sink deeper into these states, and also subsequently the practices that promote these states. So breathwork, meditation, they've been really interesting to experiment on L-Theanine. I've experienced a severe drop in the lag time it actually takes when I sit down on the meditation pillow to get into those kind of transcendental states. And it's also reflected in the insights I get, but more measurably, my heart rate is really interestingly a lot lower. I think there's also something merit-worthy about myself who avoids, what would you call it, hyper-aggressive stimuli in the form of adult material, which also allows me to be more kind of sensitive to the acute effects of L-Theanine, because, you know, some people don't feel it. So if SR is something that you're practicing, I suspect you'll equally see tremendous results with L-Theanine. And, you know, if you're not addicted to nicotine, or if you're not addicted to any kind of other hyperstimuli, you'll see this very, very noticeably when you take it. Gentlemen, these are not theories, these are facts. If you subscribe to them, you can subscribe to me, and I'll see you again very soon. Take care.